I just want to present you with the facts at the very beginning of your life. They called it conception, conception. And from what research says, that there's actually a flash of light in the connectiveness of the egg and the sperm, and there's a little flash of light. I can't help but think, is that when my spirit came into formation? Is that how God breathed in through this little flash of light? And then I grow into a person with this spirit. I don't know if you can remember that. That's a pretty long time ago. I think we start getting memories around 5 years old or 3 years old, or if there's some extenuating circumstances, maybe you have snippets. And I remember everything seemed like a big deal when my kids were in public school, and we did vacations, we did hockey, we did all these things. And I remember asking them about certain times, down the road when they're done high school, and they don't even remember it. And I'm like, man, why did we waste all our memories aren't that good. And especially when you're young, you don't remember these life impacting things. And so this is oftentimes where our wounding comes in, that we don't even know it's there. I've taken vacations with my kids and we did it just for them, and they don't even remember it. We've done things and gone to restaurants and gone to different youth groups and churches for our kids, and they don't even remember it when they got older. So this is kind of that concept of where our wounding really starts. And so as we're conceived, we have this flash of light. Our spirits are breathed into existence. And about 9 months later, we're expelled from the circle, the garden, if you will. It's kind of a representation of the beginning of history, where you have this setting of the Garden of Eden. And so for the first 9 months of my life and your life, we were in this garden, so to say. We had all of our nourishment. We got all of our needs met. Everything was inside that little sphere. And then we are born and pushed and thrown out to the outside of the circle. And I don't know if you remember that LifeLab lesson where it's the God of the inside of the circle, and life is on the outside of the circle. And so many times we're caught on the outside of the circle trying to direct and arrange our lives. And really what this life of recovery, of what life is meant to be, is to have to be in this inner circle with God, with our temple, inside the temple. It's that reflection of the womb of the Garden of Eden. And really recovery is getting back that connection that we once lost. And isn't that the problem with addiction? It's a loss of connection. It's a loss of identity. It's a loss of it's being isolated. So we come into recovery for connection. We connect with God and ultimately with our fellowship and the rest of you. And so this is kind of what this concept is. We come into the outside of the circle in real life, and we are born into the spirit of this world, the spirit of fear. And so when you look at the back in the day, the garden, let's do a little recreation, a little drama skit, if you were. God breathed out of existence, out of his mouth. He created this world, and he created a garden, and man and animal and woman and nakedness and all that. Like it was a party back in that garden. There was trees and cultivation and all the animals, and it was just a really neat setting of the unity of God and man. And then fear came in the form of a serpent. He was actually created, was the most crafty of all animals. And so I just look at him as fear. The antidote to fear is love. And so you got the enemy and you got God. And so fear is always going to come into our garden because it kind of keeps us on our toes, and it gives us our self-will. And I think that's God's gift to us. For me, it's this 2% of fear that's always going to pop up. And once we start living the spiritual life, that's really my job, is to watch out for the different forms of fear that come up. We kind of look at this cast of characters, how they talk to us. And so in this garden scenario, you see the first conversation about God without God. And it came as a question of like, didn't God tell you that you could eat all of the fruit of the tree? Like they're all yours. And the woman says, oh, there's one tree that we can't eat from. God says that we'll die. And the serpent says, surely you won't die. God's just withholding from you. And isn't that the form of fear that we hear? I'm being withheld from. People are looking down on me. People are trying to take from me. I want to be equal. I want to be independent. And so I think on that day, they were driven into independence and separated from God. And in that garden, they were filled with shame and guilt, and they covered themselves up with prickly leaves. I don't know why they chose fig leaves. And maybe it was a banana. But I think it was covering up our shame and itchy, like we try to cover ourselves up and it doesn't work. It actually perpetuates the situation. And so isn't recovery getting back that spiritual connection with the Father? And so I look at the real problem is when we're outside of the circle and we're all born outside of the womb and we're born into this world, and we have a dominant enemy in the form of fear. And so what we have, God's given us this beautiful tool, and he's given us this tool called our minds. And our minds are specifically designed to figure things out, to figure trouble out. And so we look at this word trouble. It's like this internal struggle, this internal unhappiness, this internal turmoil, the mix up of all of my emotions. I'm troubled inside. There's troubled waters. The outside is causing this to not go so well. And so our minds are constantly at work trying to fix it. And so our minds are great, but they are problem oriented. And so doesn't your mind, once it figures out a problem, tries to find another problem? This is a horrible way to run your life because you're going to be in a constant state of problems. That's not very peaceful. And so many times our mind, because we're not spiritually connected to the river, to the source of peace and hope and joy and comfort and structure and discipline and purpose, our minds are trying to figure out what's missing. And our minds are trying to figure out why we don't fit in, and how do we get to belong, and how many kids do we need to be happy and fit in, and what kind of job do I need, and what kind of career, and all of this stuff. I'm figuring it out, and it can be very draining, especially if we have this spiritual wounding going on, and I'm trying to protect myself. I'm trying to sustain myself, but I'm trying to prove myself at the same time, and I'm building these walls to the people around me. And no one really understands what's going on inside. And then I finally find it. I find this solution. And for me, I found alcohol. For you, you might find something else. You might find food or relationships, or even inside of you. It could be your adrenaline. It could be these things that you become physically dependent on. Your mind has figured out the solution, but your mind's not happy with it being solved for the time being, because now I need more of it. I need it more often. And now my mind has come to really clamp down on this is what the solution is because it works so good. And so maybe you can relate to being in the problem all the time. We really understand that how many problems you had in the womb. I guess they're all external, but you didn't really have any choice. You were along for the ride. Whether your mom smoked cigarettes, whether your mom was a health nut, whether your mom ate Popeye's chicken, whatever it was, you got to reap the benefits of the outside of the circle, because you couldn't even say no, even if you wanted to. You really didn't have any choice. But isn't that what's happening today? Do we really have a choice of what's going on through our spiritual wounding? And the fear is driving us and driving our decisions and driving the way we think and perceive things and believe things. So do we really have a choice? I think we give ourselves too much power in this concept of choice. When we come into recovery, we definitely get to make a choice to turn my will and my life over to the care of God and then I go through the requirements of that by really looking at what's blocking me from God, what's in this garden that I've created, what's in my life that I've created. And what we really get to see is like, I don't want this creation. And so, God, would you just take it root and branch? You look at that tree, and like, can you just rip it out and we'll start all over? And then we go through this spiritual concept of reaping and sowing and making amends to the world around me. And now I'm sowing seeds of God's love. I'm sowing seeds of unity and joy and peace and love and patience and endurance and tolerance. And I'm making it all because God is directing me and guiding me, and I'm back in the garden. I'm in his garden with his peace and his love, and I'm cultivating a garden that he has designed. And I start that through this process of making amends. And so when we're on the outside of the circle, it really means I'm trying to run the show. I'm trying to exert my will. I have my work life, I have my friends' life, I have my church life, my recovery life, and then I have God. But if God's not in all and is all, then aren't you on the outside of the womb? Like, aren't you trying to say, Mom, don't eat that? Like, that doesn't make us feel good. Like, whoa, woman, way too much coffee. Like, slow down. The doctor said, like, we don't even have a choice in there. And it's the same out here when we're being fueled by fear. How many choices do we really have? And so we're kind of that in my life lab that we're doing. I'm in the middle of we're at the beginning of the spiritual wounding part, and really understanding what's kind of getting in the way. Like, what am I, how does fear really operate in my life? And so we looked at the cell phone, and the cell phone's a great tool. The cell phone, I believe, was made to communicate, was made to be able to call your loved ones, maybe get calls from people that want to sell you a trip in Mexico. Maybe the IRS is calling it, but it's a form of getting a hold of you and having community and fellowship with the people that you love. I know that we all get the odd call that we don't love, but that's just the way it is. Imagine you had no data and you had no Wi-Fi or whatever it is now, because we can all make calls on Wi-Fi. But just pretend that we don't have Wi-Fi or data. You still have a phone. And it's not useless. It can light your way. Like, it can actually be used as a flashlight. Can you believe that they put flashlights in phones? That's just crazy. Oh, a calculator too. You can calculate. Isn't that what our mind's doing 24/7, is trying to calculate all of our problems? Imagine living in your problem all the time, because your mind is never going to stop working and then creating more problems as you go. That's just the beautiful thing about our minds. Untamed, unled by the Spirit, it's going to continue to just go automatically. And so the enemy actually comes in through our minds, comes in through, surely God's not depriving you. Like, surely God won't kill you. Surely he's just trying to hold you back. He's trying to dominate you. You could be just like him. Don't you want to be like your dad? Come on. And so the enemy is always trying to come into my mind, and my mind's trying to figure out all of the problems that the enemy's shooting at me. And I'll tell you right now, if you can't calm your mind, who's in control? And the enemy always wants mind control. Even in the military, they'll kidnap a soldier, and they typically won't kill them right away, and they'll subject them to water torture and fingernail pulling. And these are just things I've read on the TV, watched in movies. And they'll torture them to try to get in their minds, to try to get to what they know. And the enemy of us, we are made in God's image, and the enemy is trying to destroy us. And so the enemy comes in through our minds and starts speaking, and our minds are starting to calculate. Yeah, I do need a better job. Yeah, I do need to make more money. Oh yeah, I do need a new fill in the blank. All of those things. And none of them are wrong. We're just leaving God out of it. And so how do we get back into the garden? Because that's what recovery is really getting back in the garden and having full usage of my cell phone. Because it does cool things, but it's not the way that it was intended and designed. And so I can have this communication with God that is actually real, like we can have on a cell phone. And so I promise you that when you are, if you've experienced some substance abuse, they call it the spirits. Like alcohol is known as spirits. And so that the spirit of alcohol has guided and directed my decisions for a very long period of time. And there's a delusion that God can't do that. We have a pathway through the 12 steps, whatever fellowship you're in through LifeLab, is really coming into a prayer and coming into the awakening that I am on the outside of the circle and my life's a mess. And I have this physical problem. I have this mental problem. I might be stuck in my addiction, spinning out all the time. And this is what it says in the big book. Resentment is the number one offender. It's not alcohol, it's not food, it's not drugs, it's not the relationships, it's none of those things. Alcohol, resentment is our number one offender. On another page, it says, I shouldn't have done this. Now I'm going to want to look for it and I can't find it. Oh. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. It's not even saying to be rid of your alcohol, of your drugs, of your food, of your porn, it's talking about above all things. I must be rid of selfishness. What's this selfishness? This selfishness is me playing God. That's the selfishness of living on the outside of the circle, being driven by fear. So the resentment is our number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. And this is where we kind of get up to this point of like, I am physically dependent on a substance. And when I use it, I have no control or very little control, or I lose control once a month or whatever it is. And then once I put my stake in the sand and say I will never do this again, a month later I do it again. And I've been doing this for years and maybe decades. And I get to this point where I'm like physically and mentally done. I'm different than other people. Like other people can drink and I can't drink because what it does inside of me, it produces a craving for more. I have an abnormal reaction that medically they say about 10% of us have that. But you could have that in your own context, whether it's food. You see people eating food and they're like, man, how can they just stop like that? And meanwhile, you bake a sheet of brownies and they're for your friends and you eat them all before you get to your friends and you have to do it all over again or be sick or whatever it is. But that can happen with adrenaline. That can happen with overeating. It can happen with cutting. It can happen with any type of addiction that produces something inside of you, a chemical reaction inside of you that it doesn't probably dissipate out of your body, which produces a craving for more. And so we get to that point of like, I am physically and mentally done and different than the world around me. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. So now we get to see what the solution is. We have not only been physically and mentally ill, we have also been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So it's saying that above all things, stop playing God, get back in the womb. I don't think we can do that physically, but it's the picture in our adult mentality, which actually seems ridiculous. But that's what we're being asked, to get in the middle of the garden, to be a fit spiritual condition connected to God. And that's our work, to be close to God and do his will. And so we get into this world separated from God. The enemy of fear has all of these messages inside of us. We have these opportunities to be wounded. And maybe if you're like my kids, you remind them of stuff. And they're like, nope, don't remember that. Nope, don't remember that. Like, I remember some bad parenting I did. Like, it was kind of funny, but it was like I wasn't like a spanker guy, but I was like a little bit physical. And I remember like I was done with them, and they both had to go to the bathroom, and they were fighting to get into the bathroom. And so like I hit one of them with a binder, and it made like a crack, like a rifle shot. And the one kid, it doesn't hurt. He went down like I had shot him. And it was like the worst day of his life. I'm moving out. You're the worst parent. I'm calling the police. He doesn't remember it. Like 5 years later, 10 years later, like I ask about these things. I remember one of the boys, he was in our bed, and we were like, reading stories and talking, and then he wouldn't leave. And I'm like, okay, I need to work in the morning. You need to leave. You're leave. And he won't leave. And I literally dragged him out of my bed. He fell on the floor. He's all upset. It's the worst day of his life. We're the worst parents. He's moving out too. And it's like, these situations stick in my head. Like, maybe I really wounded him. Maybe those are spiritual woundings. And I ask him about it, and he's like, nah, I don't even remember that. Like, he goes, actually, you were a good parent. Like, those are good stuff. Yeah. Good on you, Dad. You should have dragged me out on the floor. I deserved it. There's bad parenting that I've actually done, being absent in my addiction, not being present. One of the gifts of recovery that I just remembered the other day is like, I remember getting a phone call in the middle of my addiction. And my addiction, I would go out for 2-3 days. And I remember getting a phone call, and my wife, Vicky, was taking my son to the hospital with a very serious condition. And I got the message, but there was no way I was ever going to show up at the hospital in my condition. And then now my son has a medical condition that requires our attention since he's been 16 years old. And I have been there and been wherever I needed to go whenever he needed me to be there every time, because that's what being present and being in the Spirit of God has given me, is that I am present and I am connected, and I'm going to respond to the needs of the people around me. And so I get these wounds, and you'll always have a message from the wound. Whether your dad hit you on the back with a binder or threw you out of the bed, there's always a message. And the enemy is going to say, see, you aren't loved. See, you are different than your brother. See, you're not even. See, you do have to prove yourself. And then through that message, I come into an agreement with it. I say, yeah, like this isn't fair. And then I make a vow. I can make that vow of like, hey, I'm just going to prove myself. Or, hey, what's the point? Screw authority. You can go any which way. And so this is how my spiritual wounding takes place. And it comes out in being a fearful, timid spirit. It comes out in being an orphan spirit, a defiled spirit, a crushed spirit, imprisoned spirit. All of these types of wounding from different, all these types of spiritual wounding from different sources and different wounds, but then different vows and promises and agreements have been made. And so we have made agreements with the enemy of fear, and that's why we're on the outside of the circle. And so the hope is through the concept and tool of inventory, we actually come out of agreement with those things. And so now we get to clear the store shelf of our heart and have God's spirit come in and replace the spirit of fear. And so I think in the garden concept, we get to go back to that garden. That's what recovery is going back to the garden, that I can be in unity with God's love and his spirit and not worry about the outside world. That's up to God to build my life. And I have to be obedient in that garden. But the tempter, the spirit of fear is always going to poke his head in. And isn't that my job, is to watch out for the enemy? Be vigilant. The enemy is crouching and prowling around like a lion ready to pounce on me. And so my work is to stay in the garden, and my job is to watch out for the enemy of fear and do the will of God. And so I have to be in the garden for him to direct me and guide me. The outside of the circle, that's his business. And so I think that's the hope, is that I have a God that will solve all of my troubles. All of my troubles are of my own making within me. And my mind is a great tool, but left untreated in the spiritual malady, it is separate from the garden, and it'll figure out every problem that can be thrown my way. But there is peace and there is hope, because the God of love comes inside to build the temple, to build a new garden. And my job is to cultivate that and grow in effectiveness, to be his produce dealer, his light, his salt to the world around me.